There is a silent truth that dictates human interaction. If others do not perceive clarity, strength, and absolute certainty within your voice, they will never truly trust you. They will not follow your guidance, nor will they take decisive action based on your words. You may possess brilliant concepts, decades of profound experience, and genuine value to offer the world. However, if your internal processing and external speaking fail to mirror that substance, your ultimate potential remains entirely invisible. Most individuals operate under the false assumption that effective communication is merely about maintaining a smooth delivery or projecting superficial confidence. Yet, sustainable influence never originates from being polished. It is birthed from organized thinking, calm authority, and the deliberate selection of precise vocabulary. It requires complete mastery over your vocal tone, breathing patterns, pacing, and structural timing, combined with an intuitive understanding of when to articulate and when to command silence. A massive segment of society remains trapped in an exhausting professional loop. They speak before their thoughts are fully formed, over-explain their positions because their initial delivery lacked focus, and pile on redundant wording out of a desperate fear of being misunderstood. They speak extensively, but fail to speak with sharpness. They consume vast amounts of airtime without moving a single soul. They vocalize with the passive hope of being heard, rather than speaking with a strategic intention to lead. Meanwhile, high-caliber leaders operate through an entirely different paradigm. They finalize their thoughts before opening their mouths. They speak less frequently, but with drastically higher quality. They select their words with the meticulousness of a craftsman choosing sharp, necessary tools. They maintain a steady, unshakable vocal resonance that automatically commands the room, allowing silence to perform the heavy lifting for them. When people take action under their guidance, it is not due to artificial pressure, but because of a deep, organic respect. The divide separating these two groups has absolutely nothing to do with inherent talent, baseline intelligence, or natural charisma. The distinction is found entirely within four core pillars: cognitive clarity, tonal authority, linguistic precision, and situational timing. When you master these four pillars, every single human interaction transforms into an immediate opportunity to lead. When you lack even one, your statements lose their structural weight instantly. This material is designed as a rigorous training regimen, a systemic sharpening of the mind, a deep refinement of your vocal delivery, and a complete reconstruction of how you project presence globally. You will unlock the exact mechanics required to organize chaotic thoughts, control vocal modulation, execute high-impact phrasing, regulate emotional output, structure complex messages, and read situational energy so your insights land precisely when the audience is most receptive.
Chapter 1. The Foundation of Cognitive Clarity. Many people operate under the illusion that communication begins the exact moment their mouth opens. In reality, impactful communication originates within the absolute silence that precedes the very first syllable. It exists in the intentional space where you aggregate your thoughts, crystallize your core objective, and strip away non-essential information. It demands internal clarity long before any audible sound waves navigate the air. You have undoubtedly encountered individuals who speak continuously yet convey nothing of substance. They circle their primary point repeatedly, throwing waves of secondary words to bridge the massive gaps left by unorganized thinking. They accelerate their pacing because they feel internal uncertainty, and they overcomplicate their explanations because their central thesis is fundamentally weak. Within that downward spiral, they completely lose the attention of the room. A long message is never a strong message. A clear message is an undeniable message. The vast majority of professionals do not fail in communication due to a lack of intellect. They fail because they attempt to process, filter, refine, and organize their concepts at the exact same moment they are actively articulating them. The human brain is simply not wired to execute real-time structural engineering and high-precision verbal delivery simultaneously under pressure. This cognitive overload is the precise reason people ramble, repeat identical talking points, and sound significantly less competent than they actually are. True clarity is not an inherent genetic gift. It is an unyielding mental discipline. If your internal mind resembles a cluttered workspace stacked with unrelated data points, superficial distractions, and emotional noise, your external wording will completely mirror that internal chaos. Conversely, when your cognitive desk is pristine, your primary objective becomes immediately visible to everyone in the room. Consider the common scenario of being blindsided by a complex question during a high-stakes corporate meeting. The average professional experiences an immediate spike of internal panic and rushes into a premature response, terrified that a brief pause will make them appear completely unprepared. Yet, this panicked rushing directly causes over-talking, defensive over-explaining, and a massive drop in executive delivery. The seasoned professional who intentionally embraces a deliberate pause instantly claims psychological power rather than losing it. This is because the pause is the exact geographic location where clarity is constructed. The pause is where true leadership reveals itself. Masterful communicators never rely on speed. They speak from a fundamentally calm, highly structured mind. They actively pull in a controlled breath, isolate the absolute essence of their perspective, and release a clean, unburdened sentence. Because that sentence is completely devoid of filler, the entire room falls silent to process it. Treat your ideas like a body of water. When water is aggressively stirred by anxiety or speed, it becomes instantly muddy and opaque. When you intentionally allow it to settle, it becomes perfectly transparent. Your thoughts operate under the exact same physics. Achieving this level of transparency requires something that many people deeply fear: a willingness to slow down. Slowing down your delivery does not imply a reduction in cognitive speed. It signifies a massive upgrade in processing quality. It grants your brain the required spatial buffer to separate high-value signals from low-value background noise. One of the most devastatingly powerful skill sets you can cultivate is the systematic filtering of your thoughts before they manifest as speech. Force yourself to identify the exact thesis of your message. Ruthlessly slice away the surrounding fluff. Eliminate the emotional residue, isolate the absolute core, and only then articulate from that central point of certainty. A magnificent psychological shift occurs when you speak from a position of absolute clarity rather than external pressure. Your vocal cords naturally steady, your delivery becomes entirely intentional, and your concepts land with massive structural weight. Audiences actively lean forward to capture your words rather than tuning out, because humans across every organizational hierarchy instinctively respond to clarity with profound respect. There is a baseline standard that professionals eventually internalize. If you are completely incapable of summarizing your core argument in a single clean sentence, your mind has simply not finished processing the thought yet. The single sentence is the ultimate diagnostic test of your mastery. When you can articulate a complex concept with pristine simplicity and surgical precision, you have achieved true ownership of that thought. This specific mastery of the single sentence is the exact dividing line between absolute leaders and casual talkers. Clear thinkers confidently navigate intense cross-examinations because they completely master the core of their message long before diving into micro details. They refuse to hide behind dense, unnecessary complexity, and they never patch structural holes in their arguments with verbal padding. They strike directly at the heart of the matter, and that unyielding directness acts as an absolute magnet for authority. Furthermore, true clarity is not merely an intellectual achievement, it is an emotional discipline. Unregulated emotional static stands as one of the single greatest barriers to clear human thought. The underlying fear of being harshly judged, the fear of being factually incorrect, or the fear of appearing caught off guard, routinely forces people into a state of manic over-talking and severely diluted thinking. They sprint through their phrasing, desperately hoping that raw velocity will mask deep-seated insecurity. However, internal insecurity only amplifies as your structural clarity weakens. The single safest, most bulletproof way to communicate is to finalize your thinking before producing sound. When you possess absolute certainty regarding the core architecture of your statement, you no longer harbor an underlying fear of silence. You do not fear external judgment, nor do you fear unexpected interruptions. You speak from a deeply grounded position of intent rather than a state of baseline panic. Another radical transformation occurs when you systematically separate what you are currently feeling from what you actually mean to communicate. Internal feelings generate pure noise. Objective meaning creates pristine clarity. It is entirely possible to experience high levels of frustration, confusion, or professional pressure while simultaneously communicating with absolute linguistic precision. The exact second you recognize this boundary, you permanently reclaim absolute sovereignty over your speech. Essay Chapter 2. The Command of Calm Authority. There exists a highly specific vocal archetype that forces an entire room to instantly cease all activity and listen. It is never the loudest voice within the environment, nor is it characterized by hyperactive energy or theatrical charisma. It is an unshakably calm voice, a deeply steady, resonant delivery that belongs to an individual who leads effortlessly without ever needing to push. Calm authority represents one of the most statistically powerful communication tools in modern professional ecosystems. It does not operate by dominating or intimidating others. It functions by stabilizing the surrounding environment. It completely reassures the room and naturally commands attention rather than pleading for it. Average communicators operate under the delusion that authority is directly tied to increased volume, rapid pacing, or elevated emotional intensity. Yet, high intensity, detached from cognitive clarity, yields nothing but friction, not confidence. True authority is never about volume. Authority is entirely about presence. And presence cannot exist without absolute calm. You have routinely observed individuals who speak at such a frantic velocity that they physically trip over the construction of their own sentences. Their vocal pitch spikes upward. Their pacing accelerates uncontrollably, and their perceived confidence completely vanishes right before your eyes. You can tangibly feel their internal anxiety radiating through the air, even if their underlying data points happen to be technically accurate. The core message might be completely valid, but the fragile delivery renders it utterly useless. A shaky, ungrounded voice instantly makes a brilliant idea sound highly defensive. A rushed delivery makes a clean strategy appear thoroughly confused. A tense, strained voice transforms a collaborative suggestion into an aggressive challenge. Conversely, an unshakably calm, centered voice completely transforms the architecture of information. A calm delivery makes an identical concept sound remarkably grounded, exceptionally credible, and intensely trustworthy. This occurs because vocal calmness signals absolute physiological control. It lets the world know that you are not merely reacting to external stimuli, but actively choosing your exact output. When your voice remains calm, you speak from a position of unshakable internal stability rather than frantic external urgency. Your diaphragm deepens, your pacing slows to a premium rhythm that allows listeners to fully digest your meaning, and your pitch drops into a lower register that conveys natural confidence rather than strained desperation. Your overall presence expands organically across the room without requiring a single ounce of forced effort. Human beings do not follow the individual making the most noise. They follow the individual who remains the most structurally stable. This principle becomes paramount during moments of intense systemic friction, such as high-stakes corporate presentations, critical career interviews, deep organizational conflicts, or volatile negotiations. When external emotions spike, the natural human reflex is to accelerate speech, constrict the throat muscles, and descend into defensive over-explaining. People talk frantically as if they are actively trying to outrun their own internal discomfort. However, sprinting through psychological discomfort only serves to magnify it to the audience. True calmness does the exact opposite. It completely absorbs external tension, intentionally slows the perception of time down, and reassures everyone present that the current situation is entirely manageable because you are completely in control of yourself. This is the absolute definition of professional influence. This elite command of calm authority begins entirely with the mechanics of your breath. Your breath is the literal physical foundation of your vocal tone, your pacing, your inflection, and your overall emotional equilibrium. When your breathing is shallow and restricted to the upper chest, your voice becomes thin, fragile, and inherently shaky. When your breath is frantic, your phrasing becomes scattered. When your breathing is entirely unmanaged, your professional presence dissolves. But the exact moment you establish a deep diaphragmatic breathing pattern, every single component of your delivery locks into perfect alignment. Your tone immediately drops into a grounded register. Your pacing transitions into an authoritative cadence, and your thoughts settle long enough for premium clarity to manifest. A calm voice communicates a devastatingly powerful message before you even articulate a single word. It informs the audience that you are the absolute master of your own nervous system. When people sense that level of self-mastery, they instinctively surrender their trust to your direction. Analyze the specific public figures, top-tier executives, elite coaches, and industry leaders who command the highest levels of global respect. They almost never rush their delivery. They rarely, if ever, raise their volume to compete with noise. They refuse to allow passing internal emotions to leak into their public presentation. Instead, they speak with an unyielding, measured pace, utilizing a tone that carries massive gravitational weight without requiring any physical force. That tone is never a fortunate accident of biology. It is the direct result of deliberate psychological training and vocal discipline. Calm authority is not about the artificial suppression of human emotion. It is about the absolute mastery of that emotion. So it never hijacks the clarity of your message. It is about acknowledging your internal reactions, whether that is fear, pressure, or raw excitement, without allowing those variables to distort your delivery. Your voice functions as an open billboard for your internal nervous system. When you consciously calm your internal biology, your voice immediately projects that serenity outward. When your voice reflects unshakable calm, the individuals surrounding you automatically experience a reduction in their own anxiety. Human beings instinctively trust the specific person who possesses the unique ability to calm them down. There is an immense, almost unfair professional advantage in being the single most still individual in a chaotic room. A calm speaker grants the audience the necessary space to fully internalize meaning. They allow their words to breathe. They utilize silence strategically, treating it not as an awkward void, but as a high-contrast framing tool that maximizes the impact of their next sentence. They do not harbor a fear of the pause because they understand that the pause communicates absolute ownership of the room. The pause is never empty space. The pause is pure emphasis. Chapter 3. The Selection of Linguistic Precision. Words are never neutral variables. Words are active forces that either systematically strengthen your message or completely dissolve its structural integrity. They either build an ironclad wall of professional credibility around you or cause your authority to evaporate. Most people populate their daily vocabulary with words that carry absolutely zero structural weight. They deliberately dilute their sentences with weak, non-committal phrases like maybe, sort of, kind of, I guess, basically, and I think. They actively water down the potency of their insights without even realizing it. Their core message completely loses its momentum before it even completes the journey to the listener's ear. If your words are fundamentally soft, your presence will be perceived as soft. When your words are surgically precise, your presence is experienced as immensely powerful. People never evaluate your thoughts in a vacuum. They judge the validity of your confidence by the exact language you select. Your vocabulary serves as the direct window through which an audience measures your baseline competence. Human beings do not just process the literal data you share. They constantly evaluate how decisively you articulate that data. Consider the vast psychological gulf between a professional who states, "I think this might be a good route for us to look into," versus a leader who cleanly states, "Here is the exact direction we will take." The underlying business concept is identical, yet the impact on the organization is completely different. A message wrapped in verbal uncertainty cannot motivate human capital. A message grounded in absolute linguistic precision commands immediate execution. Weak phrasing signals that you are unsure of where you stand. Strong language signals that you are immovably anchored. Masterful communicators never rely on volume to simulate authority. Their true power originates directly from precise word choice. They utilize clean, bold, highly decisive language. They aggressively eliminate verbal clutter and speak with total intention. Weak communicators routinely hide behind soft filler words to shield themselves from accountability, whereas elite leaders replace filler with raw clarity. Your words are the literal tools you employ to shape human thought. A dull, damaged tool yields sloppy, uninspiring work. A razor-sharp tool executes flawless cuts. Your professional influence depends entirely on how sharp your verbal instruments are. Imagine an expert craftsman attempting to construct a premium table using a completely dull saw. The physical effort required is immense, but the final product is noticeably flawed. Now, picture that same craftsman utilizing a pristine automated blade. The exact same action becomes incredibly smooth, clean, and stunningly precise. One of the single most pervasive mistakes professionals make is operating under the false assumption that adding a higher volume of words will make their concept clearer. It does not. It merely introduces overwhelming background noise. Audiences do not retain long, meandering explanations. They retain clean, high-impact statements. Phrases like, "This is what matters," "Here is the core issue," "Let's decide on this path," and "The next immediate step is this," carry massive structural weight because they completely eradicate doubt from the environment. They show immediate leadership, absolute clarity, and deep confidence. The average person weakens their message because they are terrified of sounding too direct. They fear being judged as aggressive or rigid, so they bury their true insights under mountains of soft, evasive language. Directness is never rudeness. Directness is the highest form of clarity, and absolute clarity is a profound professional gift. Audiences do not want you to ramble. They do not want you to soften the reality of the situation. They want to understand you instantly. Strong word choices make that understanding possible. When your message is clear, people know exactly how to align their behavior. When your message is vague, your audience experiences immediate cognitive confusion. Confusion completely paralyzes human action, whereas clarity creates rapid momentum. This is precisely why elite communicators view filler words as verbal crutches. Filler words might help an insecure speaker stand up temporarily, but they permanently prevent them from walking with power. The moment you remove those crutches, your message stands tall on its own merits. Furthermore, there is a profound psychological feedback loop at play. Your language directly dictates your personal identity. When you consistently speak with uncertainty over an extended period, you actively train your brain to think uncertain thoughts. If you habitually say, "I guess," in your meetings, you inevitably begin to second-guess your own strategic intuition. If you constantly label your choices with "maybe," you transform into a hesitant, low-impact professional. Your words shape your internal biology and neural pathways far more than you realize. Fortunately, the reverse is equally true. When you consciously speak with unyielding conviction, you actively force your brain to think with absolute conviction. When your words are clean, your executive decisions become clean. Your vocabulary acts as the direct thermostat for your personal power. Raise the quality of your language, and you instantly raise the caliber of your identity. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Commanding Structure. True leadership is never just about the raw content of your speech. Leadership is entirely about the hidden structural architecture that supports what you say. A clean, disciplined structure transforms a collection of random ideas into a clear, unified direction. A weak, unmanaged structure turns valuable insights into pure noise. Every single professional conversation becomes drastically easier the moment your message possesses a spine that is strong enough to stand firmly on its own feet across any room. Most professionals struggle deeply with communication not because they lack baseline intelligence, but because they completely lack structural discipline. They dive headfirst into a complex story without ever establishing the core point. They overwhelm the audience with micro-level details before providing macro context, and they speak for several minutes before finally arriving at the central thesis that should have been delivered within the first 10 seconds. If your message completely lacks structure, your professional influence will entirely lack strength. Human beings do not follow scattered, drifting thoughts. They follow a highly visible trajectory. A structured message functions exactly like a premium roadmap. It explicitly informs the audience where you are currently standing, where you are going, why that specific destination matters, and exactly what variables they need to pay attention to along the journey. Without that roadmap, your listeners are left guessing in the dark. Guessing breeds immediate confusion, and confusion permanently destroys trust. When an audience fails to comprehend your core message, they never assume the concept is simply too advanced for them. They assume that you are fundamentally disorganized as a thinker. Unstructured communication makes teams hesitant, doubtful, and completely disengaged from your vision. A truly powerful message requires an absolute anchor, a singular, unshakable central point around which all supporting data orbits. It demands clarity at the absolute summit, robust data support in the middle, and unmistakable action-oriented direction at the conclusion. It guides the listener along a tightly managed path, rather than dragging them through a wandering wilderness. Most importantly, it makes your audience feel safe, knowing they are in the hands of an absolute expert who knows precisely what they are doing. Structure is never a restrictive prison. Structure is the ultimate forms of professional liberation. It permanently sets your message free from the chaos of over-explaining. Imagine walking into an executive boardroom without a structured message. You open your mouth and begin verbalizing. You throw various ideas into the air, jumping back and forth between big-picture concepts and operational minutiae. By the conclusion of your monologue, even you are not entirely sure what your primary point was, and your audience is completely lost. Now, imagine walking into that exact same boardroom with an ironclad structural framework. You know the exact thesis. You know the precise reason why it demands immediate attention. You have isolated the singular, devastatingly powerful example that validates your claim, and you know the exact phrasing you will use to close. The contrast is night and day. One version sounds like frantic amateurism. The other version sounds like absolute leadership. This elite framework follows a highly predictable, beautifully disciplined sequence. Point, support, pause, and direction. A commanding message always leads directly with the primary point. It completely bypasses long, drawn-out build-ups and historical context. By leading with your thesis, you instantly anchor the listener's attention. They know exactly what to focus on. They know precisely what the conversation is about. And they know exactly where the meeting is headed. Once the primary point is firmly driven into the ground, you transition into the support phase. This is where you introduce your data, your context, and the logical reasoning that validates your position. Support is what transforms a casual opinion into unassailable authority. However, the absolute secret to elite support is extreme restraint. Too many examples dilute the message. A master communicator shares just enough data to illuminate the point, never enough to drown it. Directly following the support phase comes the most routinely neglected step in professional communication, the deliberate pause. The pause is the exact mechanism that locks your message into the consciousness of the audience. It grants your listeners the necessary breathing room to fully absorb the gravity of what you just delivered. It adds immense weight, seriousness, and intentionality to the room. Finally, you close your structural architecture with explicit direction. Direction tells the audience exactly what must happen next. It effortlessly transforms intellectual understanding into immediate real-world momentum. When you inform people of the exact next step, you're not being overly pushy. You are operating with total clarity. A message that lacks direction leaves an audience drifting. A message packed with direction leaves an audience completely empowered to execute. Chapter 5. The activation of action-driven speech. Intellectual understanding is not the same thing as real-world action. Passive agreement is not the same thing as behavioral execution. A room full of nodding heads does not equate to a true professional commitment. If your words fail to actively move people to modify their behavior, you are not influencing anyone. You are simply making noise. This represents one of the single most massive blind spots in contemporary professional communication. People believe that achieving clarity is the final goal. Yet, clarity detached from action is a fundamentally unfinished message. You have witnessed this exact failure break down countless times. A professional presents an incredibly smart concept, and everyone in the room nods along in total agreement. Everyone says the idea is brilliant and highly important. Then, the meeting ends, and absolutely nothing changes. Ideas never fail because they are inherently bad. Ideas fail because they are not properly converted into real-world movement. This is the massive chasm that separates a standard communicator from a high-impact influencer. A standard communicator explains data. An influencer activates human capital. A standard communicator shares information. An influencer generates unstoppable momentum. Your words should never be designed to merely inform the mind. They must be weaponized to trigger immediate movement. Action is the literal heartbeat of influence. If your speech fails to alter what an individual thinks, feels, or physically executes, your message has failed its ultimate purpose. When you consciously shift your objective away from filling space and dedicate your speech entirely to triggering real-world movement, your entire verbal identity changes. Your tone sharpens, your structure tightens, and your presence becomes intensely focused. This action-driven paradigm requires one radical mental shift. You must know the exact action you want the audience to take before you even draw a breath to speak. It cannot be a generalized expectation like, "I want them to understand the strategy." It must be an explicit, highly tangible behavior. Human beings will never take action if the next step is wrapped in vagueness or feels overwhelmingly complex. People take immediate action when the next step is beautifully simple, hyper-specific, and instantly doable. Look at the most impactful leaders throughout global history. They never conclude an executive briefing by trailing off with a weak "so, yeah." They never leave their team wondering what they are supposed to execute. Their communication always terminates with clear, undeniable direction. Direction is influence in its purest, most concentrated form. Humans possess an unyielding hardwired instinct to follow definitive guidance when it is delivered with absolute certainty. This has nothing to do with being dictatorial or overly aggressive. It is about providing structural safety. The cleaner your direction, the faster people will rally to execute it. Unclear communication creates immediate hesitation, while precise direction sparks immediate motion. Most individuals hesitate to move forward simply because the ultimate goal feels entirely too massive. Elite leadership is the art of shrinking the immediate next step until it feels completely achievable. When you shrink the step, you systematically eliminate all psychological resistance to execution. Your role is to function as the definitive voice that removes all friction from the environment. To speak in a way that consistently triggers real-world action, you must master the mechanics of emotional urgency. Human beings take massive action when they experience a clean sense of professional urgency, never when they feel paralyzed by stress. High stress completely freezes human cognitive function, whereas clean urgency wakes the system up. True urgency is manufactured through the perfect combination of clarity, timing, and explicit direction. When your message explicitly maps out exactly what matters, precisely why it demands attention right now, and outlines the immediate next step, momentum is generated almost automatically. Your audience does not have to burn precious cognitive energy trying to figure out what to do. You've already performed that heavy lifting on their behalf. This is exactly why your language choices matter so intensely. Weak, hesitant phrasing completely kills organizational momentum, whereas strong language sparks immediate execution. To Chapter 6, The Mastery of Emotional Frequency. Your message is never merely composed of the literal words you articulate. Your message is entirely defined by the exact emotional frequency wrapped around those words. Audiences do not just process your syntax, they read the precise state of your mind. Nothing exposes the reality of your internal mental state faster than your vocal tone. Tone is the ultimate truth teller behind your language. Your tone instantly broadcasts whether you are fundamentally centered or completely overwhelmed by the situation. It explicitly informs the audience whether they should trust you implicitly or question your capability. Your tone is your literal emotional signature across the environment. A massive percentage of professionals completely lose their influence, not because their underlying text was incorrect, but because they delivered the right text with a completely broken tone. A defensive, highly reactive tone makes a brilliant strategic insight sound deeply insecure. A rushed, frantic tone makes a critical update appear incredibly sloppy and unmanaged. A tense, strained tone transforms a peaceful suggestion into a hostile attack. Your vocal tone completely shapes human perception, long before the logical centers of the audience's brain even have a chance to evaluate your data. You can articulate everything perfectly according to the script, but if your tone betrays your internal anxiety, you will fail. Emotional tone is the bridge that connects your internal intention to your external impact. If that bridge is unstable, your message crashes. Your physical nervous system controls your tone. The moment your biology experiences high levels of stress, your throat muscles automatically constrict and your voice becomes brittle. When internal anxiety spikes, your vocal pitch naturally rises. When internal frustration takes over, your verbal rhythm becomes erratic, sharp, and overly aggressive. Your voice constantly broadcasts your deepest internal vulnerabilities, whether you want it to or not. This is precisely why maintaining absolute emotional grounding is a non-negotiable professional discipline. It is a biological impossibility to deliver a perfectly stable, authoritative message from a thoroughly unstable mind. Your tone will always ruthlessly expose what you are trying to hide. To master your tone, you must achieve total sovereignty over your internal biology. A calm mind yields a calm tone. A calm tone breeds profound trust. Trust creates influence. The objective is never to completely eliminate human emotion from your delivery. The objective is to direct that emotion with absolute precision. Emotion is an incredibly potent fuel when directed intentionally, but it is entirely destructive when unleashed without control. Consider the individuals who possess an undeniable, unforgettable presence. They never sound rattled, frantic, or overly reactive when challenged under pressure. Their vocal tone remains deeply anchored in a lower register. That steadiness is not a matter of luck. It is an unyielding discipline of emotional self-regulation. A reactive speaker instantly spikes the negative energy of the room, whereas a grounded speaker completely stabilizes the entire environment. Humans instinctively surrender their trust to the individual who remains completely composed when everyone else is losing their balance. Vocal stability begins with absolute physiological awareness. You can never regulate a variable that you fail to actively notice. Therefore, the first step is recognizing the exact split second your internal biology begins to shift under pressure. Noticing when your breath becomes shallow, when your shoulders tighten, and when your vocal pitch begins to climb. Awareness opens the door to total command. The moment you detect these physiological changes, you must immediately ground your system by dropping your breath deep into your diaphragm, deliberately regulating your pacing, and ruthlessly reconnecting with your core intention. This simple, disciplined act instantly converts emotional turbulence into pristine vocal authority. Speed always communicates underlying anxiety, whereas vocal stability communicates absolute mastery. Chapter 7. The Architecture of Credibility and Trust. Trust is the foundational currency of all human influence. Without trust, your words carry absolutely zero weight. Without trust, your most brilliant concepts will fall entirely flat. No amount of superficial charisma, advanced intellect, or manufactured confidence will ever move an audience if trust is absent from the equation. Trust is the concrete foundation upon which every single piece of communication must stand, and that trust is either built or permanently destroyed through two variables: linguistic precision and radical honesty. You never earn sustainable trust by attempting to sound perfect or performing an idealized version of yourself. You earn trust by being intensely real. Modern audiences possess an acute radar for performance. They crave clarity, not a show. They demand absolute truth, not corporate fluff. Human beings trust you completely when your spoken words perfectly match the observable reality of the situation. They don't trust you because you make massive, inflated claims or exaggerate your metrics. They trust you when your language is consistently precise, deeply grounded, and completely transparent. Precision is never cold or detached. Precision is the ultimate form of professional respect. It signals to your audience that you value their time too highly to waste it with vague, ambiguous terminology. Radical honesty, on the other hand, forms the literal backbone of your career credibility. Honesty means having the professional courage to state exactly what you know, cleanly admit what you do not know, and directly address the brutal reality of a situation, even when it is profoundly uncomfortable to do so. Honesty is never about blunt aggression or tactless delivery. It is about completely transparent intent. The world does not require you to be a flawless oracle. They demand that you be a transparent leader. When an audience feels entirely safe within the presence of your words, their resistance dissolves. They fully trust your strategic direction. They embrace your recommendations, and they willingly align themselves with your grand vision. Consider the exact moments in your past when someone permanently lost your trust. It was almost never because they made an honest operational mistake. It was because they actively tried to hide it. It wasn't because they lacked the immediate answer. It was because they manufactured a fake one. Lack of transparency destroys trust exponentially faster than any business failure ever could. Commit to an unyielding professional standard. Say only what you can stand behind with absolute certainty. Never promise a result that you cannot guarantee. Never speak in sweeping absolutes when you harbor internal uncertainty. Never inflate your vocabulary or your metrics simply to sound impressive to the room. True precision is power. Exaggeration is pure weakness. Audiences can detect the exact second you begin to oversell, and it immediately triggers suspicion. Once that baseline trust cracks, it requires an immense amount of time to repair. Trust flourishes when your message is immovably anchored in observable reality. One of the single most authoritative, trust-building phrases you can articulate in the corporate world is beautifully simple. I do not have that exact data point right now, but I will secure it. It signals immense strength because it informs the audience that you value truth far above personal ego. Jesuits Chapter 8, The Strategic Weaponization of Critics. Silence is one of the most devastatingly powerful tools in the entire realm of professional communication, yet it remains the single variable that the average person fears the most. The untrained communicator experiences a massive spike of internal anxiety the moment quiet enters the room, and they rush frantically to fill that space with meaningless verbal noise. However, the paradigm of leadership is clear. Silence is never a sign of weakness. Silence is the ultimate demonstration of raw psychological strength. Silence is the existential dimension where your words gain their gravitational weight. It is the necessary pause that allows your concepts to sink deep into the consciousness of the audience. If you master the intentional deployment of silence, your speech will instantly carry 10 times more operational impact. The average professional completely misinterprets silence, assuming that a quiet room indicates that something is going wrong or that they appear thoroughly unprepared. As a direct result, they sprint through their sentences, leaving zero space between thoughts. But you must internalize this fundamental law of communication. The individual who completely controls the silence entirely controls the room. Silence is never empty space. Silence is pregnant with strategic meaning, total intention, and immense authority. Silence projects absolute self-assuredness because only a highly grounded, deeply confident professional can hold a quiet room without experiencing a panic response. The moment an audience senses that you are entirely comfortable with silence. They instinctively attribute immense power to your presence. When you speak without utilizing deliberate pauses, your entire message blurs into a continuous, uninspiring wall of sound. It becomes intensely difficult to follow, impossible to fully digest, and deeply challenging to respect. Words delivered without spatial buffers feel incredibly rushed, inherently desperate, and completely ungrounded. But the exact moment you introduce intentional, highly disciplined cadence, the entire energy of the environment shifts. Your words land with the force of physical objects. Silence functions as the high contrast frame around the canvas of your speech. It is the brief pause between musical notes that actually grants the melody its beauty. Silence transforms standard talking into permanent executive impact. Study the delivery of the most impactful global figures. They do not sprint through their material. They do not fear the quiet. They let silence do the heavy lifting for them. Silence is the exact moment the listener's brain catches up to process your meaning. It manufactures healthy tension, deep gravity, and intense focus. The louder and more chaotic modern society becomes, the more lethal the weapon of silence becomes. Modern professionals are continuously bombarded by endless digital and mental noise. They are completely fatigued by people who talk endlessly without saying anything of substance. Therefore, when they encounter a leader who speaks with deliberate, measured pauses, it feels instantly authoritative. It breaks the expected pattern of noise, and breaking the pattern is how you permanently capture human attention. Furthermore, silence is an indispensable tool for cognitive processing. When you choose to pause before answering a complex question, you permanently protect yourself from making an impulsive, emotional, or poorly constructed statement. You grant your brain the required space to select the absolute sharpest words rather than the fastest words. Fast words are born from a desire to please the room. Chosen words are born from absolute clarity. Imagine an aggressive competitor lobbing a highly confrontational question at you during a high-stakes corporate negotiation. The amateur immediately fires back a rapid, defensive response, exposing their internal panic. The master, however, embraces a long, deliberate pause, staring directly at the interrogator with complete composure. That silence immediately shifts the psychological pressure away from the speaker and places it heavily back onto the challenger. Chapter 9. The Intelligence of Situational Adaptability. True professional influence is never a one-way broadcast. It is entirely dependent upon your ability to deliver the right sentence at the exact right moment, tailored to the specific energy of the room. You can articulate a perfectly constructed phrase, but if the audience's nervous system is not currently prepared to receive it, your message will fall entirely flat. Situational timing can completely elevate your concepts or utterly destroy them. The rare ability to read a room accurately is what separates standard corporate talkers from unforgettable, high-impact leaders. It is the difference between speaking at human beings versus speaking with them. You cannot lead an environment that you are completely numb to. When you choose to ignore the emotional climate of the room, your communication becomes immediately disconnected and irrelevant. If you aggressively misread the room, your delivery becomes entirely inappropriate for the moment. But when you actively tune into the environment, sensing its hidden currents, its pacing, and its emotional temperature, your message locks into perfect alignment. Every room has a unique psychological climate. Some feel highly tense, some are wide open, some are deeply impatient, and others are thoroughly skeptical. The average communicator completely ignores these vital metrics, marching forward to deliver their pre-planned script like a rigid robot. Leadership, however, demands real-time responsiveness, not a routine. To read a room with elite precision, you must completely shift your internal focus away from "how do I look right now?" and dedicate 100% of your awareness to what is this audience currently feeling. Their body language will tell you everything you need to know. Their eye contact, their breathing patterns, their posture, and the specific quality of their silence will map out the truth of the room long before anyone speaks. Notice whether they are leaning forward or closing off their posture. These are unmistakable data points. Reading a room is not an act of mystical mind reading. It is pure observation and emotional intelligence in action. It is knowing exactly when to push your agenda forward and when to intentionally pull back. Some rooms require a surge of high-conviction energy, while others demand a quiet, hyper-rational approach. You must speak directly to the energy that is sitting in front of you, never to the idealized energy that exists inside your head. This is the precise location where many professionals fail. They cling desperately to their pre-written notes, even when the unfolding reality of the meeting demands a radical pivot. True influence never stems from sticking blindly to a script. It comes from responding flawlessly to reality. If you feel the audience's attention beginning to drift, your message needs an immediate structural shift. It must become faster, sharper, or more direct. If you feel the room tighten with anxiety, you must ground the topic before introducing intensity. Masterful communicators never fight the energy of the room, they ride it. They seamlessly modify their tone, volume, pacing, and direction to match the exact psychological needs of the audience in real time. This level of adaptation is never a sign of weakness or compromise. It is the ultimate demonstration of professional mastery. Think of communication as elite surfing. You do not control the ocean wave. You learn to read its physics and ride its energy. If you fight the wave, you crash instantly. When you speak into a highly resistant room with forced aggressive energy, their internal resistance only multiplies. But when you speak into that resistance with deep situational awareness, the room naturally softens. People do not reject information because it is factually incorrect. They reject it because they don't feel understood by the speaker. Chapter 10. The discipline of perpetual mastery. True communication mastery is never constructed upon advanced, flashy techniques. Mastery is built entirely upon the basic fundamentals, executed with unyielding consistency, deliberate focus, and total intention. Elite communicators do not constantly chase the latest superficial public speaking tricks. They continuously sharpen the foundational essentials until those skills are deeply woven into their personal identity. You must face a universal truth you will never rise to the level of your grandest potential. You will fall completely to the level of your daily discipline. The core fundamentals of elite communication are beautifully simple. Pristine cognitive clarity, heavy word choices, an unshakably calm tone, a disciplined message structure, total emotional self-regulation, and acute situational awareness. None of these fundamentals are flashy or dramatic on their own merits, but when they are repeated thousands of times over an extended career, they transform you into a powerhouse leader whom audiences trust instantly. The average professional desires the fruits of mastery without ever submitting to the unyielding repetition required to achieve it. They want absolute confidence without putting in the deliberate practice. They want massive influence without the underlying discipline. But sustainable influence is never a fortunate accident. It is a permanent habit of excellence. Consistency is the sole architect of elite skill. Think of the absolute greatest performers, athletes, and corporate leaders across global history. They don't spend their days practicing highly complex, bizarre techniques. They practice the absolute basics of their craft over and over until those basics become entirely automatic. They treat the fundamentals with immense professional respect because they understand that the basics win the highest stakes games. Communication operates under the exact same laws of physics. Your mental clarity becomes sharper only when you actively practice filtering your thoughts every single day. Your vocal authority becomes steadier only when you consistently train your breath and regulate your nervous system under real-world pressure. Your word choices become heavier only when you ruthlessly eliminate verbal crutches from your vocabulary. Your message structure becomes second nature only when you force every email, meeting, and presentation into a disciplined framework. Mastery is simply unyielding repetition made visible to the world. Amateurs abandon the fundamentals far too quickly, moving on to variety because the basics feel boring. But true mastery requires immense depth, not variety. This disciplined repetition does not make your communication sound robotic or manufactured. It makes your delivery exceptionally reliable. It creates a highly predictable executive presence that the corporate world can depend on. Every single time you consciously practice a fundamental skill, you systematically strip away a layer of internal self-doubt. You reinforce your internal stability, building a quiet, unshakable confidence that everyone in the room can immediately feel the exact second you open your mouth. It signals to the world that you have done the required internal work to know exactly who you are. The ultimate transformation of voice and identity. Every profound journey of professional transformation eventually reaches a definitive summit, a moment where the core lessons fully settle, the mental clarity sharpens to a razor's edge, and the message lands in the deepest chambers of your identity. You have journeyed through the architecture of clear thinking, calm tonal command, linguistic weight, structural spine, action-oriented activation, emotional self-regulation, strategic silence, and situational adaptability. You have seen how each individual piece fundamentally reconstructs the delivery of your speech. But of crucial importance, you must recognize the deepest truth of this work. When you permanently alter the way you speak, You completely transform the way you live. The unique voice you project into the global environment is never just a mechanical act of speech. Your voice is the direct, unvarnished reflection of your entire internal world. It is the primary gateway through which the human race measures the caliber of your mind, the purity of your intentions, the depth of your values, and the reality of your confidence. You are not merely practicing a superficial corporate skill set, you are actively refining your personal identity. You now understand with absolute certainty that true influence is never loud, aggressive, or theatrical. Genuine influence is beautifully clear, entirely intentional, and immovably steady. Your words hold massive gravitational weight because your mind holds absolute clarity. Your presence becomes unforgettable because your tone remains completely calm under pressure. You have permanently outgrown the old habit of speaking from a place of panic, rushing through your sentences, and over-explaining your value to a room that isn't listening. You have unlocked the ability to hold your ground when the surrounding environment descends into absolute chaos. You now possess the required tools to step into any boardroom, any negotiation, or any relationship globally and completely command the emotional frequency of that environment through your own self-mastery. But you must remember that true mastery is never a static destination. It is a perpetual, lifelong continuation. It is an unyielding lifestyle constructed upon daily repetition. Every single professional interaction you engage in moving forward is an immediate live opportunity to practice this elite discipline. Your voice is an immense professional responsibility. Audiences do not merely process the literal text of your presentations. They instantly feel the exact quality of the intention sitting behind your voice. When you speak with total clarity, you actively gift the room with clarity. When you speak with radical honesty, you provide everyone present with absolute psychological safety. When you speak with unyielding strength, you lend the audience the required courage to act. Your voice must become the definitive anchor that people trust implicitly across a chaotic world. You possess the complete blueprint required to become that legendary communicator. From this precise second forward, every sentence you form, every pause you hold, and every breath you draw will either reinforce the old version of you or build the powerhouse leader you are destined to become. Step forward with total focus, command your voice with calm authority, and lead